Parents of Reddit, what was your worst parenting mistake? Put my son, who was about 8 months old at the time, onto our changing table that is about waist high and turn around to grab more diapers. Terrible decision. Caught him rolling off the table out of the corner of my eye, but it was too late. He fell 3 feet, landed directly on his face, and did a full scorpion. He's never cried so hard in his life before or after. I held him and just started crying because I felt so guilty hurting him like that. You didn't hurt him. It was an accident that could happen to any one of us. A 3-year-old woke up in the middle of the night and came to tell me she had a bad dream. I walked her back to her room and talked to her about her dream. She said she was dreaming there were bugs crawling on the walls and in her bed. I told her that it was just a dream and the bugs only existed in her head. She didn't go back to sleep for a long time after being told she had bugs in her head. I am a pediatrician and always joke about looking for things in kids' ears when examining them. Dinosaurs, potatoes, etc. One time when I was early in training, I said bugs. Never again. That poor kid was super freaked out that there were bugs in her ear. Yeah, my kid has had a bug removed from her ear by the ENT. It was not a pleasant experience, but it only cost me $7 since the deductibles were met. After my daughter spent all her money on a skateboard, I relayed to her what I was afraid that one of the times she fell off her board, she'd get hit by a car. In less than 2 days, she didn't try anymore. I don't know if she had a scare or just didn't want me to worry, but I feel like I took one of the most physical hobbies she could have had away from her by projecting my own fear. She doesn't gravitate toward physical activity much now as a young adult. It's so hard to know what effects you'll have on your kids. All you can do is your best. And hey, who knows? Maybe she would have been creamed by a dump truck if you hadn't said it. Neither of my parents have read it, but they have told me this has been their biggest mistake with me of all time. I was a kid about 14, and I was riding my bike in the front yard. Anyway, I end up falling over onto the ground on my bike while standing up and not moving. Long story short, it feels like I've just been drop-kicked in my balls. So I head inside and lay on the couch in pain for a while. I asked my parents to take me to the hospital and they refused. Told me I was just being a baby and that the pain would go away. About an hour and a half later and many tears, they finally agreed to take me in. Turns out I had given myself a testicular torsion and the lack of blood to that area of my body meant I was going into emergency surgery. I lost a testicle the same day less than 10 minutes later. Never forgave them for it. Similar scenario, except it was a dislocated finger and my parents waited 2 weeks to take me in. It healed at an almost 45-degree angle. My biological egg donor then had the idea to take me in when I couldn't hold the damn fork correctly. The doctor scheduled me for an emergency surgery that night because I would have lost half of my finger if they didn't. I still haven't forgiven them for that, among other things. My worst parenting mistake involved a trip to the ER. It was about 8 years ago in December. It was my wife's birthday, but we weren't going anywhere because a huge snowstorm had hit our area. No problem though, I would do all the shoveling. Can't have her shoveling on her birthday. My son, then about 7 or 8, came out with me to help shovel. We're doing a good job and clearing off the snow when it happened. As I was bringing my shovel up, my son bent down to pick up more snow. I hit his head with the corner of my shovel, the very sharp corner. He shrieked and held his eye. I suddenly worried that I had put my son's eye out. Well, I didn't, but I did get him right above his eyebrow, and he was bleeding a lot. His coat was getting covered in blood. We went in and couldn't stop the bleeding. Well, so I put my son in the car, stopped by my in-laws' house less than a mile away to pick up my mother-in-law. My wife stayed home with our youngest son, who was a toddler then, and drove to the ER in the blizzard. They were great and glued my son's wound shut, a special glue that they can use instead of stitches. He was fine, but I felt like the worst dad in the world. His coat was a loss and I ruined my wife's birthday. Plus, to this day, you can see an indentation where I hit my son in the head with a shovel. My dad once accidentally spilled boiling water down my leg, which required a trip to the ER. Happened about 20 years ago, and I recently found out he still considers it one of the worst days of his life. My dad accidentally burned me with a hot pan when I was in preschool. He did not appreciate that I went to school the next day and loudly announced, "My daddy burned me last night." Not locking up pills. My daughter was maybe 2 on a camping trip. We had one of those MF pill holders with some anti-anxiety medicine in it. She got into it while we were unloading the minivan. We noticed some of the pills were missing. We were almost to the ER and we noticed them laying on the floor bed. Kids will find anything unless a parent asks them. Oh man, one time my wife and I took our son on a trip to the harbour since he was now old enough to go with us on these trips. After a fun-filled day, we were driving back home and my wife glanced in the back seat and went, "Where's our son?" I guess we were not used to having a third person with us when we went out, so that's a story of how we almost forgot our child. Something like this happened to me, except I was the child. Once when my mom was picking me up from school, she was in a rush to get home. So I tossed my bag in the front seat, and just as I was about to hop in the back, she drove off. She was about halfway to my house when she realized her mistake and came back to the school to pick me back up. I'd started to walk home when I saw her pull into the school parking lot, and I walked back to her. She hates it when me or my father bring it up to others. Not a parent, but when I was 7, my parents told me I killed my grandpa. Here's how the story goes. My mom and dad are super superstitious, and they have this thing against white. Now, in my culture, white is used in funerals, so living people are not allowed to wear white on their heads, hats, bows, hairbands, etc. Anyway, one day I was playing with white thread and it got stuck in my hair. As soon as my mom saw it, she ripped it out and yelled at me. Within a week of this incident, my grandpa, who was on the other side of the earth, died by slipping on something and hitting his head. My parents said that because I was playing with white thread on my head, that's what caused my grandpa to die. As a 7-year-old, I lived with the guilt of murder for 10 years. That is horrible! To blame a kid for something both ridiculous and out of the kid's control? My biggest regret is telling my now teenage toddler to sing real songs instead of letting her just sing nonsense. You haven't lived until you've heard a 3-year-old singing along with Poker Face. Russian roulette is not the same without a gun. Expecting my first to be potty trained way earlier and way easier than she actually was. It turned me into an unrecognizable monster, to be completely honest. Not the kind of parent I strive to be. It was a complete months-long disaster. Now potty training is my second, and it helps so much that I've waited until she was almost 3. Do you have any advice? Ours is 4 months from being 3, and she needs to be potty trained by 4 for preschool. I'm trying not to push it, and I ask her every day if she wants to sit on the potty, and the answer is almost always no. I've offered stickers if she sits on the potty, her favorite thing, and it doesn't always work, and she hasn't actually used it. I'm getting anxious and reading up stuff in books and online. I just want to be able to send her to preschool potty trained. My dad has a few answers. When they had my older brother, he was a tiny baby and was lying on my parents' bed. My dad got on the bed and the baby went flying off the bed and landed on the floor. They claim that's the only time they dropped any of us on our head, or in general. The other answer was having twins. I am one of those twins. I might agree with having twins. I have them. I don't know who thought 2 at a time was a good idea. The first time we took our son out, we went to a place called Mother Care, which is a store for baby clothes and toys, and this particular place had a large display area filled with various prams and pushchairs. We parked our newborn in his hand-me-down pram nearby because he couldn't fit among the sea of display models, and gleefully found the Pushmaster 5000, or whatever it was that we had our eye on, and then went through the process of buying it and organizing when would be a good time to pick up our purchase at a later date. We then left the shop, and we were 10 minutes up the road before we remembered we had a baby and that we had left him behind. I used to work at Mother Care. This was not an uncommon experience. Don't worry. Choosing my first wife to be the mother of my oldest child. She was beautiful and interesting, but she had severe mental health problems that she flat out refused to treat in any way except for large amounts of alcohol and copious piles of Xanax. I tried for a few years to make things work, but after coming home to find that she'd sent the nanny home, gotten trashed, and passed out on the kitchen floor while my 2-year-old was totally unsupervised, we packed up and left. She hasn't even bothered staying in touch and is still exactly the same 16 years later. I wish I'd chosen a more stable, mentally sound person to marry and have a child with. It's caused my daughter a lot of anxiety and worry. You did the right thing. Hopefully things will get better for your daughter when she gets older. But also I hope your life was much better in the years after leaving. I have 2 kids. One is almost 2, and the other was born at the start of February. A few days ago, I put the older child in bed while my fiancée put the new baby to sleep. She then went to take a shower while I was watching TV, mostly screwing around online with the TV making a noise in the background. A few minutes later, I heard a baby crying and assumed it was the TV. Then noticed a baby crying didn't fit with what was happening on TV. As I was wondering where the sound was coming from, I noticed it was too young sounding to be our 2-year-old. So I thought maybe the TV was on in the other room and ignored it for a couple of more minutes. Then I finally remembered that we have 2 kids now. For a few minutes I completely forgot one of my children existed.